Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Quick question. How long did it take you to choose what to watch on Netflix last night? If you're like most people, you probably spent more time scrolling through options than actually watching anything. You had thousands of choices instantly available, but instead of feeling excited by all those possibilities, you felt overwhelmed, anxious, and somehow incapable of making a simple decision about how to spend 2 hours of your evening. This isn't just a modern problem with streaming services. It's a fundamental issue with human psychology that Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard identified 200 years ago. The more choices you have, the more anxious you become, and anxiety literally paralyzes your ability to choose anything at all. Right now, you probably think anxiety is something that happens to you when external circumstances become stressful. You feel anxious about work deadlines, relationship problems, health issues, or financial pressures. But Kierkegaard discovered something much more disturbing. Anxiety isn't primarily caused by external threats. It's caused by freedom itself, by the terrifying realization that you can choose differently than you're currently choosing, and that every choice eliminates all the other possibilities you're not choosing. Think about any major decision you're currently avoiding. Career change, relationship commitment, moving to a new city, having children, ending a friendship that's not working. You probably know what you should do, or at least what you want to do, but you keep postponing the decision. Why? Because making the choice means accepting that all the other possible lives you could live will remain unlived. Choosing one path means saying no to every other path, and that prospect is psychologically terrifying. Kierkegaard called this the anxiety of freedom, the existential dread that emerges when you truly recognize that you're free to make choices that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life. Your ancestors didn't have this problem. Their life paths were largely determined by family tradition, social class, geographic location, and economic necessity. They had fewer choices, which meant less anxiety about choosing. You have virtually unlimited options for how to live, what to believe, who to become, and what to pursue. This should be liberating, but instead it's paralyzing because every choice carries the weight of infinite alternatives. The coffee shop with 50 drink options creates more anxiety than the coffee shop with 3 options. The dating app with thousands of potential partners creates more anxiety than the small town where you might meet a dozen available people. The career website with millions of job postings creates more anxiety than the economy where you had 3 realistic job options. More freedom doesn't create more happiness, it creates more anxiety. And anxiety makes you incapable of using your freedom effectively, trapping you in indecision while you're surrounded by possibilities. Part 2. The paradox of choice that's making you miserable. Here's where Kierkegaard's insights get really uncomfortable. The very freedom that's supposed to make you happy is actually making you miserable. Because having choices creates anxiety, and anxiety destroys your ability to enjoy whatever you choose. This is what psychologists now call the paradox of choice, the counterintuitive reality that more options lead to less satisfaction, not more. Think about your last major purchase. Did you research extensively, compare multiple options, read reviews, and analyze features before deciding? And after you bought it, did you feel completely satisfied, or did you second-guess your decision and wonder if you should have chosen something else? If you're like most people, you probably experienced buyer's remorse, not because you made a bad choice, but because you were aware of all the other choices you didn't make. Every benefit of your chosen option reminded you of the benefits you gave up by not choosing the alternatives. This happens with every significant decision. The career you choose means giving up all the other careers you might have pursued. The person you marry means not marrying anyone else you might have loved. The city you live in means not living in all the other places you might have enjoyed. Kierkegaard understood that this awareness of unchosen possibilities creates a peculiar form of suffering. Not the suffering of bad outcomes, but the suffering of knowing that things could always be different if you had chosen differently. You end up living your actual life while simultaneously being haunted by all the lives you're not living. Instead of being present in your choices, you're anxious about whether you're making the right choices. This anxiety gets worse as your options increase. The person with 2 job offers might feel some stress about choosing, but they can evaluate both options thoroughly and make a reasonably confident decision. The person with 20 job offers becomes paralyzed by analysis. They can't possibly evaluate every option thoroughly, they can't predict which choice will lead to the best outcomes, and they become increasingly anxious that they're about to make a mistake that will ruin their life. The abundance of choice that's supposed to guarantee you find the perfect option actually makes it impossible to be satisfied with any option, because you're always aware that perfection might have been just one more choice away. This is why people in arranged marriages often report higher satisfaction than people in choice marriages. It's not that arranged marriages are objectively better, but the people in them aren't constantly wondering if they chose the right person, because they didn't choose at all. Meanwhile, people who chose their partners from a large pool of possibilities are always somewhat anxious about whether they chose correctly, whether they could have found someone better, whether they're missing out on other relationship possibilities. The freedom to choose becomes a psychological burden rather than a gift, because choice requires you to take responsibility for outcomes while knowing you can never have complete information about what those outcomes will be. Kierkegaard saw this paradox as fundamental to human existence. We need freedom to be fully human, but freedom creates anxiety that makes us less capable of being fully human. Part 3. The leap of faith that most people can't make. Here's where Kierkegaard gets to the heart of why decision-making feels impossible. Most important, life choices can't be made rationally because they involve unknowable futures and unpredictable consequences, which means every significant decision requires what he called a leap of faith. You can't rationally decide who to marry because you can't predict how either of you will change over decades of marriage. You can't rationally choose a career because you can't know what industries will exist in 20 years or how your interests will evolve. You can't rationally decide whether to have children because you can't know what kind of parent you'll be or what kind of person your child will become. Every major life choice requires betting your future on incomplete information and unpredictable variables. This isn't a problem with your decision-making process. It's the fundamental nature of human choice in an uncertain world. But most people can't accept this uncertainty, so they try to make rational decisions by researching extensively, creating pros and cons lists, seeking advice from others, and analyzing options until they feel confident about their choice. This approach doesn't work for existential decisions because no amount of research can eliminate the fundamental uncertainty about how your choices will affect your life. You end up stuck in analysis paralysis, collecting more information that doesn't actually make the decision any clearer. Kierkegaard observed that people often spend years trying to find rational justification for choices that can only be made through faith, not religious faith necessarily, but existential faith in your ability to handle whatever consequences emerge from your decisions. The leap of faith isn't about being irrational or impulsive. It's about accepting that uncertainty is inherent in human existence and making choices anyway, trusting that you can adapt to whatever outcomes result from your decisions. Think about the decisions you've been avoiding. Are you waiting for more information that would make the choice obvious? Are you hoping that circumstances will change in ways that eliminate the need to choose? Are you trying to find a risk-free option that guarantees good outcomes? If so, you're trying to avoid the leap of faith that all meaningful choices require. You're trying to eliminate the anxiety of uncertainty rather than accepting uncertainty as the price of freedom. But this avoidance strategy keeps you stuck in indecision, which is itself a choice. The choice to let circumstances decide for you rather than deciding for yourself. The person who can't decide whether to end a relationship that isn't working is choosing to stay in that relationship. The person who can't decide whether to pursue a career change is choosing to stay in their current career. The person who can't decide whether to move to a new city is choosing to stay where they are. Indecision isn't the absence of choice. It's a specific choice that hands control of your life to external circumstances rather than your own values and preferences. Kierkegaard's insight was that authentic living requires accepting the anxiety that comes with making choices without certainty, rather than trying to eliminate that anxiety by avoiding choice altogether. The leap of faith isn't about blind optimism or reckless decision-making. It's about making conscious choices based on your values while accepting that you can't control or predict all the consequences of those choices. Part 4. The 3 stages of existence and why you're probably stuck in the wrong one. Here's where Kierkegaard gets really sophisticated. He identified 3 different ways people try to deal with the anxiety of freedom, and most people get trapped in approaches that make their anxiety worse rather than better. The aesthetic stage is where you try to eliminate anxiety by maximizing pleasure and avoiding commitment. You keep your options open, sample different experiences, and avoid making choices that would limit your future possibilities. The aesthetic person doesn't commit to relationships because commitment would eliminate other romantic possibilities. They don't choose careers because choosing would eliminate other professional possibilities. They don't develop deep beliefs or values because conviction would eliminate other philosophical possibilities. This sounds like freedom, but it's actually a prison of infinite possibility where you're too anxious about foreclosing options to actually engage deeply with any option. You end up living on the surface of experience, never diving deep enough into anything to discover what fulfillment actually feels like. You're free to choose anything, but you're too anxious about choosing wrong to choose anything meaningful. The ethical stage is where you try to eliminate anxiety by following universal moral principles and social expectations. You make choices based on what you should do rather than what you want to do, using external standards to guide decisions so you don't have to take full responsibility for the outcomes. The ethical person chooses the socially appropriate career, marries the suitable partner, follows conventional moral guidelines, and lives according to established principles. They've solved the anxiety of choice by letting external authorities make their choices for them. This reduces anxiety in the short term, but it creates a different kind of suffering, the suffering of living someone else's life rather than your own. You avoid the risk of making wrong choices by avoiding the possibility of making authentic choices. The religious stage is where you accept the anxiety of freedom as inherent to human existence and make choices based on your authentic values while accepting uncertainty about outcomes. This isn't necessarily about religious belief in the conventional sense. It's about what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith, the willingness to make commitments and choices without guarantees, trusting in your ability to handle whatever consequences emerge. The religious person, in Kierkegaard's sense, chooses relationships, careers, beliefs, and life paths based on authentic inner conviction rather than external pleasure or social approval. They accept anxiety as the price of authentic living rather than trying to eliminate it through avoidance or conformity. Most people cycle between the aesthetic and ethical stages, avoiding commitment when they want to preserve options and following conventions when they want to avoid responsibility. Very few people reach the religious stage where they can make authentic choices while accepting uncertainty. This is why decision-making feels so difficult for most people. They're trying to solve an existential problem, how to live authentically in an uncertain world, with aesthetic solutions, keeping options open, or ethical solutions, following external guidelines. But authentic decision-making requires accepting that uncertainty is inherent to human existence and making choices anyway based on your genuine values and convictions. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety about choices, it's to choose authentically despite the anxiety. Part 5. The analysis paralysis, that's stealing your life. Here's something that'll explain why you spend weeks researching decisions that don't actually matter. When faced with the anxiety of choice, most people try to reduce that anxiety by collecting more information, but more information often makes decisions harder rather than easier. Kierkegaard would recognize this as a form of bad faith, using research and analysis to avoid the fundamental uncertainty that makes choice anxiety-provoking in the first place. Think about your last major purchase decision. How much time did you spend reading reviews, comparing specifications, checking prices across different websites, and researching options? And how much of that research actually helped you make a better decision versus just postponing the moment when you had to choose? The information gathering feels productive and rational, but it's often just anxiety avoidance disguised as thorough preparation. You're not actually trying to make the best decision. You're trying to make a decision that feels guaranteed to be correct, which is impossible for any choice that matters. This analysis paralysis gets worse as the stakes get higher. The choice of restaurant for dinner might take 5 minutes of research, but the choice of career might take months or years of investigation, networking, soul-searching, and planning. But career choice is fundamentally uncertain regardless of how much research you do. You can't know what it will feel like to do a job until you're doing it. You can't predict how industries will change, how your interests will evolve, or how external circumstances will affect your opportunities. All the research in the world can't eliminate the basic uncertainty that makes career choice anxiety-provoking. The research becomes a way to avoid confronting that uncertainty rather than a way to resolve it. The same pattern shows up in relationship decisions, living situation choices, and any other significant life choice. You can research compatibility, investigate neighborhoods, or analyze options endlessly, but eventually you have to make a choice based on incomplete information and unpredictable variables. The research phase feels more comfortable than the decision phase because research creates the illusion of progress without requiring the anxiety of commitment. But excessive research often makes decisions harder by increasing your awareness of all the variables you can't control and all the outcomes you can't predict. Kierkegaard understood that this analysis paralysis is ultimately a form of cowardice, the unwillingness to accept responsibility for choices whose outcomes you can't guarantee. The solution isn't to stop researching entirely or to make impulsive decisions without any information. It's to recognize when you have enough information to make a reasonable choice and then make that choice despite remaining uncertainty. The question isn't, how can I know for certain that this is the right choice? The question is, based on what I know about myself and my values, what choice feels most authentic to who I want to become? That question can be answered without perfect information, but it requires the courage to accept responsibility for outcomes you can't completely control. Most people would rather stay stuck in research mode than accept the anxiety that comes with making consequential choices based on incomplete information. But staying stuck is itself a choice. The choice to let circumstances decide rather than deciding for yourself. Part 6. The freedom that's making you ill. Here's Kierkegaard's most disturbing insight. The unprecedented freedom available to modern people isn't just creating decision-making problems, it's creating a new form of psychological illness that didn't exist in more constrained societies. He called it the sickness unto death. Not physical death, but spiritual death that comes from being overwhelmed by possibilities while being unable to choose authentically among them. Your great-grandparents had constrained lives, but they also had clear identities. Their roles, relationships, beliefs, and life paths were largely determined by family, community, religion, and economic necessity. They might not have been happy, but they knew who they were. You have unlimited options for identity construction, but you have no external framework for making those choices. You can be anyone, believe anything, live anywhere, pursue any goals, and form any relationships, but you have to decide for yourself what's worth being, believing, or pursuing. This freedom should be liberating, but it's actually psychologically overwhelming because it places the entire burden of meaning creation on your individual shoulders. When everything is possible, nothing feels necessary. When all choices are equally valid, no choice feels particularly meaningful. When you can change anything about your life at any time, nothing feels stable or reliable. You end up in what Kierkegaard called the anxiety of becoming, constantly aware that you could be different than you are, but paralyzed by the infinite possibilities for who you could become. This manifests as chronic dissatisfaction with your current life, combined with inability to change your current life. You're simultaneously restless and stuck, aware of possibilities, but unable to actualize them. The modern epidemic of anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness isn't primarily caused by external circumstances. Most people have better living conditions than any generation in history. It's caused by the psychological burden of having to create meaning and identity without external guidance or constraints. Social media makes this worse by constantly exposing you to alternative lives other people are living, reminding you of all the possibilities you're not pursuing. Every scroll through Instagram is a reminder of paths not taken, experiences not had, and choices not made. You see someone traveling the world and wonder if you should quit your job and travel. You see someone getting married and wonder if you should be more committed to finding a partner. You see someone starting a business and wonder if you should be more entrepreneurial. Instead of being grateful for your choices, you become anxious about all the choices you're not making. Instead of being present in your actual life, you're distracted by all the potential lives you could be living. Kierkegaard would recognize this as the inevitable result of unlimited freedom combined with no framework for using that freedom authentically. When anything is possible, everything feels both urgent and pointless simultaneously. The solution isn't to eliminate freedom or return to more constrained social arrangements. It's to develop the psychological capacity to make authentic choices despite uncertainty and to accept the anxiety that comes with freedom as the price of being fully human. This requires what Kierkegaard called the courage to be yourself, the willingness to choose who you want to become and commit to that choice even when you can't know for certain that it's the right choice. Part 7. Embracing the anxiety, the only way forward. After all this analysis of decision paralysis, choice anxiety, and existential freedom, you're probably wondering, so how do I actually make decisions without being paralyzed by anxiety? How do I choose authentically in a world of infinite possibilities? Kierkegaard's answer is both simple and terrifying. You don't eliminate the anxiety. You learn to choose despite it. You accept anxiety as the inevitable companion of freedom and make decisions anyway based on your authentic values and convictions. First, recognize that anxiety about choices is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be accepted. The goal isn't to find decision-making methods that eliminate anxiety. The goal is to develop the capacity to make choices while experiencing anxiety. Every time you try to eliminate anxiety through endless research, seeking others' approval, or waiting for perfect information, you're actually avoiding the fundamental task of taking responsibility for your life. Second, understand that indecision is itself a decision. When you can't choose between options, you're choosing to let circumstances choose for you. This might feel safer than making active choices, but it means giving up your agency and letting external forces determine your life direction. The person who can't decide whether to end an unfulfilling relationship is choosing to stay in that relationship. The person who can't decide whether to pursue a creative career is choosing to abandon their creative aspirations. Third, Focus on making choices that align with your authentic values rather than choices that seem objectively correct. There are no objectively correct life choices. There are only choices that fit your particular values, preferences, and circumstances. Instead of asking, "What's the right choice?" ask, "What choice feels most authentic to who I want to become?" This question can be answered even when outcomes are uncertain. Fourth, accept that every choice involves trade-offs and opportunity costs. You can't choose everything, and you can't know what the unchosen alternatives would have been like. Every path taken means paths not taken. Rather than being paralyzed by what you're giving up, focus on what you're gaining through commitment. Depth comes from choosing something and following it through, not from keeping all options open. Fifth, develop tolerance for uncertainty and imperfection in your choices. No choice will be perfect, and most choices will have both positive and negative consequences that you can't predict in advance. The question isn't whether your choice will be perfect, but whether you can live with the consequences of your choice and adapt to whatever outcomes emerge. Finally, practice making smaller choices as training for larger choices. Every time you choose something, from what to eat for lunch to which movie to watch, you're practicing the psychological skill of accepting uncertainty and taking responsibility for outcomes. The more comfortable you become with making imperfect choices about small things, the more capable you'll become of making consequential choices about big things. Kierkegaard's ultimate insight is that anxiety isn't the enemy of authentic living, it's the companion of authentic living. The person who feels no anxiety about their choices is either living someone else's life or avoiding real choices altogether. Anxiety is the signal that you're confronting genuine freedom and taking real responsibility for your existence. It's uncomfortable, but it's also the mark of an authentic human being who refuses to let circumstances or social expectations make their choices for them. The goal isn't to become someone who never feels anxious about decisions. The goal is to become someone who can make authentic choices despite feeling anxious about them. If this exploration of choice anxiety has made you more aware of your own decision-making paralysis, that awareness is the beginning of freedom. You can't choose authentically until you recognize the ways you've been avoiding authentic choice. Next week, we're diving into the hedonic treadmill and why trying to be happy is actually making you miserable. Subscribe now, because understanding the psychology of satisfaction might explain why nothing you achieve ever feels like enough. Your journey toward authentic decision-making is just beginning, and Kierkegaard's insights are your guide to making choices despite uncertainty and anxiety, because that's what it means to be genuinely free.